Hi, I'm 𝗿𝗽𝗋. Today I'm going to introduce you to sidestepping and frontstepping and how these mechanics could change the gameplay inside many games. From the beginning, overcoming narrow obstacles with a certain height has been something guided. The player has never had total control to avoid those elements. He has always been deprived of a great part of that control, reducing it to very simple actions. Some developers added equilibrium to balance the player's weight when passing through an abyss. And it was a great idea, but it is impossible to base a game on that, or to give it much importance during the game. The concept of sidestepping and frontstepping will change this forever. They turn those actions into actions controlled entirely by the player that can be chained with other mechanics, generating combos to avoid obstacles. The concept of frontstepping refers to walking in front. Through the use of animations and physics, the player can control with the joystick of the controller where the position of each foot goes before placing it on the surface. In this way, the player has to avoid falling off the surface trying to synchronize the foot that moves with it. Really synchronizing the feet with the surface is a mental game that can help a lot to exercise the mind to achieve this synchrony. Synchronizing the foot with the surface is not something simple. It also depends on the acceleration of the analog stick, the sensitivity with which we accelerate, and if our mind is prepared for that synchrony. At the same time, we will have to be turning the stick from right to left to place the foot on the surface correctly. As you can see, it is possible to control the movement of the leg. Achieving this synchronization is not easy. It is a real challenge that requires skill and practice. I encourage you to test games in search of this technique. Every game works differently and they all have something to learn from each other. This technique is not currently useful because no one has exploited or improved it. There are no games with environments that use it. It has never been standardized. We can find a very simple example, the floating feet. Many times the feet stay floating in front of an abyss or any elevated surface and the player does not fall. This is something that happens in most games, and this mechanic could be a reason to eradicate it. Today there are many advances in artificial intelligence. Just as DLSS technology is used to rescale the image of a game, it is possible to create a technology that analyzes the frame. And if the foot does not coincide with the surface, or it seems to float too much, then it generates a falling animation of the character. The other option would be to program very accurate physics or combine that with AI. Regardless of the two options, there will always be a need to provide good frontstepping. Sidestepping is a game mechanic that belongs to the platforming gameplay section. The mechanic consists in the lateral displacement of the character in an organic and natural way. The player has full control of the lateral displacement at all time, and can even control the exact movement of one of his legs just when it is raised in order to rest it on a certain surface, or to make a lateral movement that is not linear. When did sidestepping originate? Sidestepping has always been there. It is not something new. The mechanic is possible thanks to the animations based on the movement of the legs that the developers have programmed. The problem is that these animations have never been taken seriously to generate playable environments that allow the development of this mechanic. Those animations have never been used for that purpose, so the mechanic has never been improved at a technical level to enhance it. The first Tomb Raider games offered very advanced sidestepping. Lara had exclusive controls for it, but they never took full advantage of it. They never designed good environments focused on this mechanic. Unfortunately, this game mechanic has been completely eliminated from their games, and has been replaced by guided actions, partially controlled by the player. In this video, you can clearly see how Lara is glued to the surfaces she walks on. The game itself forces Lara not to fall. That takes organicity away from the gameplay. The game controls the player, it is not the player who controls the game. It is very common to see this type of controlled sequence when we are going to cross a board or a cliff in many other games. I understand perfectly that in some important moment of the game this resource is used, but basing a game on constantly taking control away from the player is a mistake. Here you can see how passing through a board does not require any skill, neither sidestepping nor frontstepping, just pushing the joystick forward. This is the case with the vast majority of games since Assassin's Creed hit the market, and perhaps that's why players have never looked at the Tomb Raider games with the same eyes again. The reason why sidestepping was probably implemented in the first Tomb Raider games was probably to be able to make jumps from exact points. At that time, the controllers still didn't have analog sticks, so Lara's movement with the pad wasn't very precise as it didn't have sensitivity, and it couldn't rotate either. Nowadays, sidestepping can be found in many modern games. If Tomb Raider needed some exclusive buttons, now those buttons have moved to the right analog stick in a natural way. The left one moves the body in the desired direction, the right one moves the leg. Red Dead Redemption 2 is the best example of how the technique has been wasted. Using a map editor created by the developer 𝗵𝗵𝗿𝗆, I have placed logs that cross a river infested with alligators. What I intend to show is how the game engine itself can surprise with simple map modifications. Sidestepping is not simply crossing a place without anything happening. An infinite number of things can happen. That doesn't happen when our character is glued to the ground surface because it doesn't offer us naturalness or dynamism. Now we will see how Arthur crosses a broken bridge with an injured person who has to be transported to a doctor. It is this type of gameplay that entertains the player, and unfortunately many current games have lost much of this. It's like many times developers try to do everything that the player should do. They are taking away the interactive sense, reducing it to the minimum expression. I'll reload the gun for you. I'll cross that abyss for you. I'll tell you where to go for you. I'll jump for you. I'll grab that edge for you. I'll do everything for you, you'd better do nothing. In the end, what ends up happening in such wonderful games, as in the case of Red Dead Redemption 2, is that the player simply ends up shooting at people, animals, etc. But the player doesn't have to plan routes or take into account the terrain. The world is not made for that. There are no logs that cross a river, you can't break something to open a new route, you can't move a plank of wood on the ground to pass through it. None of that, it's simply a killing game with an adventure game background. If before we were stalked by an alligator underwater while crossing some logs, now we have seen Arthur crossing a broken bridge carrying an injured person, that person could be a real player who needs our help. In this sequence, Arthur can be seen passing right next to a wall doing organic sidestepping without being glued to the wall. This shows that if game developers would work on the mechanic, it could be improved a lot more. Perhaps an animation of Arthur's hand touching the wall simulating resting on it, but without interfering with the organic mechanic, without making Arthur go through that place being glued to the board. That plank is not just a plank, that plank is a chain that links between the interactions. First, Arthur has had to throw the plank before going through it, so the player has had to analyze the environment and make a decision. The player can use multiple elements to throw the board: a bullet, a burning arrow, a Molotov. Each object will generate a different situation, and not all of them will be the best option. I wish the lasso had more uses. This proves that sidestepping is not a simple crossing game mechanic, it is conditioned by the environment. Level designers are the ones who have to make good use of it to create adapted environments and generate playable chains that are fun. This sequence also shows how Arthur is able to pass through a narrow wall by sidestepping. In the case of being with a few extra pounds you could not possibly pass, sidestepping should be designed with these details in mind. What could this type of sidestepping and frontstepping mean for video games? And what applications could it have for video games? Sidestepping should be a mandatory mechanic in most games, with environments created for it. There is no point in having that mechanic if it cannot be used in the environment. It's like wasting a technical section that you already have by simply not adding to logs to cross a river. Just as it is becoming more normal to have stealth and non-stealth games, to offer the option to act with stealth, the same should happen with this type of mechanics based on platforming. Why doesn't a game like Red Dead Redemption have elements in the environment that allow that kind of gameplay? A simple log, a half-broken bridge, etc. I have no idea, but hopefully this video will reach the developers and make them rethink the use of this mechanic to improve it and to give control of the games back to the players. Imagine these mechanics in games that offer a slower and more leisurely exploration like Red Dead or The Last of Us, or in an online mode where one player tries to throw rocks or move the board to another player who sidesteps to cross to the other side while underneath is full of poisonous snakes. Implementing sidestepping is not complicated or resource-consuming. It often exists unintentionally. You have to design environments that can make use of it. The difficult thing is if you want to program environment variables to these mechanics as to be able to lose the balance or to eliminate the floating foot. These surgical and precise mechanics still have a lot to evolve and a lot to offer. Please don't let them fall into oblivion. Platforming needs them to improve gameplay and make games more entertaining. And with a variable gameplay, they just need a little dedication to perfect the problems they present and make them a standard within the more leisurely exploration games as another playable mechanic. In this Frontstepping sequence, you can see perfectly how Arthur keeps his legs aligned with the train track. The only thing that might be missing is an animation of Arthur sort of balancing each time he starts the zigzag. It must be taken into consideration that the game has never been programmed to do this, none of those shown. If the games were programmed well, thinking in this playable section, the result would be much better. And that's all for the moment. I encourage you to try these mechanics with the games I've shown and try to discover them in others to see which ones work best. Try to stay on the edges by turning sideways doing sidestepping or in a straight line doing frontstepping. Have a nice day.